So hello everybody, I'm Rax, preferred pronouns are he and him. I'm British. My parents are from East Africa, my dad from Kenya, my mum from Tanzania. But my grandparents are Gujarati from India. My wife is a very lovely wife, and she's French, and she's in France right now. I'm 41 years old. I know I look a lot older, but that's the heat wave for you. I voted to remain in the referendum. I'm a law graduate. I'm a confirmed atheist. Grew up in a Hindu household. I suffer from depression, diabetes, and hay fever. They're the three burdens that I have to bear health-wise. And I'm absolutely obsessed with spicy food. So that's me, Shavaun.
So thanks, Rax. We wanted to do this so that we could share the aspects of ourselves that we had shared with each other before we did this session. So I spent 23 years in the UK. You'll detect an accent. I'm originally from South Africa. I spent 23 years there. So do the math and you know exactly what the lady's age is. I voted to remain, just like Rax. And I also voted in the first free and fair elections in South Africa, which was a monumental moment in history. So I sort of feel like I've voted in two very memorable votes in my lifetime. I'm a divorced mum or mom to Lachlan. So in South Africa, we say mom. In the UK, he calls me mum, and my family really noticed that when I go home. I'm supportive of organ donation. My father had a liver transplant many years ago. And my son was born with a cleft lip and palate, and so I'm a big supporter of the cleft lip and palate associations. I suffered with postnatal depression after Lachlan was born, and was terrified of seeking help for that, and I'm happy to talk to people about it. I'm not degree qualified, and I'm a lapsed Catholic. I don't know what my parents did wrong, because they're still staunch Catholics, and I very much respect their faith and observance of their religion. I'm a naive optimist. I believe in positive things will happen, and maybe that's naive, but I love looking at the potential in life rather than the downsides of it. And I'm a massive food snob, and maybe this is where Rax and I are probably divided. I hate aubergine and mushrooms. I'm really sorry, Rax.
Weirdo, Sean.
No. Friendship's over, we're done.
But I think it's really useful to kind of do an intro in that way, just to kind of show that, you know, as for me, I think when I go and talk about diversity inclusion, I know you do a lot of that as well, Shavaun, I think people project onto us kind of what they see in our individual identities that they see as a primary feature. Now, you know, I don't wake up every morning and think of myself as a person of color. And I'm sure most people don't. Kind of first thing they think of is you know, it's the color of their skin. You know, nor do I define myself by any other of these sort of factors either. But they're all really important to me. They all make up my identity. And in certain circumstances, I've probably been discriminated or felt a bit isolated against all of them, or most of the ones that are up there. Especially spicy food, when we go and eat out with friends and nobody wants to share the jalapeno pizza with me.
I'll share a jalapeno pizza with you. I love it.
No aubergine though.
We'll fight over that.
What I'd like you to do is, if you haven't already, if you can go back into that onto that app on your website, hopefully you should all kind of see a list of just factors. And what would be really interesting, we won't spend too long on it, maybe just a minute, if you could just click on the ones that you feel have at some point in your career or in your life, you've been in the minority. So whether it's age, and you've been in a situation at work where you really notice that you're not actually of a similar age to everyone else in the room, and in a way that makes you feel perhaps excluded, underrepresented, or even just something that makes you feel a bit conscious yourself, even though there isn't any pressure. So we can start to see already, you know, interesting that race is there as well. Gender, definitely. So 50% of you have been in a situation where your identified gender has kind of really made you feel like an anomaly. If we scroll down, we can see that people have also put in things like, okay, so parental care responsibilities, marital status. So I know that, you know, quite a few years ago now, you know, I was in an agency where it was all very, very young people who weren't married, and, you know, I did feel sometimes, okay, they're all talking about, you know, their single lives and their stresses, and I felt like I couldn't really maybe relate my experience as a married person to them. Place of birth is interesting. And we've got things like accent and linguistic fluency. That's something that I think we don't ever normally acknowledge. And I think that more and more, you know, it's more of an unconscious thing, but people do very much feel conscious themselves about their accent. But I think judgments are also made in the recruitment level in our industry and then throughout, pitches, for example, or who you're going to put in front of a client. We're not going to
people make decisions about your accent and you know, your how fluent you are, how you pronounce a particular word, and I know we've got some great stuff that we can share with people that really highlights that and emphasizes those, you know, that particular aspect. I know that people will quickly be working out my accent and deciding which part of the southern hemisphere am I on. You know, will they, which rugby team do I support? Is it the All Blacks, or is it I mean, the defining champions of the rugby world, South Africa? But, you know, sometimes they get it wrong.
I mean, one of the reasons I really kind of wanted to speak to you today, Shavaun, is when we initially spoke, you do a lot of work yourself going into organisations and helping unlock things like their true purpose, and a big part of that is increasingly D&I kind of falls into that category. Are you? I mean, this is a big question. Why are we in a place right now that so many organisations in our particular industry still aren't getting their approach to diversity right? That's an assumption on my part. Some of them actually are. It's one of many questions that I'd like to explore in the next hour or so. I mean, have you got a very kind of top line kind of idea on why you think people can't grasp what we've just seen in the slide before, you know, that there are multiple facets to our identity, and that some ways, you know, you can make people feel very uncomfortable by ignoring or overly acknowledging one of them or any of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people can sort of, I mean, why is my favorite question on planet Earth? And I think so many things start there. But I also think that, you know, we can attribute it to things like, you know, your sort of unconscious bias or the confirmation bias that we live the world and our lives through. But I think there's something more deep, much deeper than that, which is, I don't think that we ask ourselves that question. Why? Why do I want to work with people who are different to me? Why do I want to work with people who think differently to me? Why should I listen to opinions that don't match my own? And when you start to ask yourselves those questions, and then you start to explore that within an organizational sort of purpose perspective and a lens like that, I think you can start to get into some very uncomfortable, awkward, challenging conversations, but so necessary, because you peel away these layers of, you know, logic that we've held on to, that we've borrowed from centuries and from our parents and from our school upbringing and all of those sort of things. And then you challenge them and you say, but why do I hold on to them dearly? Why are they important? Why should I let them go? So I think why and all the questions that sit around it are so necessary if you're going to think about culturally, you know, what is your organization about? What does it intend to do during its existence? And then you've got to ask your employees and people around you why that matters to them.
Yeah.
And if you're really honest with yourself, then the conversations shouldn't be comfortable. They should be brilliant and interesting and a wonderful exploration of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I want to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I think that idea of emerging from a mutual understanding of why this is important. But I think one of the things is we don't ask ourselves enough why are we approaching diversity and inclusion from an organisational? You know, what are the benefits? And up until now, I've been in the role of chair of the PRCA's diversity network for over a year now, and when I speak to organisations or individual members about this, they are afraid of this word diversity, and they're even more afraid of the phrase diversity and inclusion. And a lot of it stems from this fear of they're only forced to act now because there's a compliance issue or because it's on the agenda. And we're going to talk a lot about that later on in our discussion. But for me, I think this whole phrase diversity or diversity inclusion is incredibly problematic unless we all agree on kind of what it is that we're talking about. So I think that's the crux of what we're going to literally be focusing on today, rather than maybe focus on some of the specific issues that clearly need to be addressed. And I think a good starting point is, I'm obsessed with this, Shavaun.
And I love it. You've introduced me to something that I think is just absolutely brilliant. I love it.
This is my philosophy for life. And yeah, I had to borrow it from Socrates. He knew what he was talking about.
He's a pretty good guy, you know?
Yeah, he had a good head on his shoulders. Socrates' kind of Socratic wisdom really comes from the point of view that you know, we're all only as wise as our awareness of our ignorance. A lot of the approaches to diversity and inclusion that I see practiced daily by, mainly on the agency side of PR, don't at all recognize that unless they can get this right, the quality of the work that they're going to be putting out there is going to be abysmal, okay? Because we have a tendency, and thanks to Rohan Shah, who introduced us to the word homophily, which is, you know, we as humans, we tend to be drawn to other people who are similar to us. And that might be a very conscious thing, or it might be an unconscious thing. But the problem is that when we surround ourselves with similar people, we just reinforce, you know, the paradigms or the perhaps the assumptions that need to be challenged. So I think a starting point for me, for everybody, is to always challenge and always be aware that we don't know, right? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah? You okay?
Yeah.
So I just did that, right? And that, if I were giving this talk in the Middle East or in Slovakia or China or the Philippines or Malaysia or Hong Kong, that would be incredibly offensive as a gesture. Thumbs up. So here in the West, it's fairly, you know, universal that we think that that's quite a great symbol. It means, are you okay? But actually, we aren't aware that in certain parts of the world, that is incredibly rude. Now, you could be in a pitch scenario and do that and have the best prepared pitch of all time, but you would never even think about that as a gesture. It wouldn't even be on your radar unless you had people around you that could have told you that, or unless you'd made that mistake before. So when we kind of dissect this Socratic wisdom, I think there's a tendency to see the world as all being similar. Okay, so there's me kind of going that and saying that's of course it's the same everywhere. But then also we have a tendency as PRs to also kind of differentiate groups. So sometimes some groups might actually need to have a different set of messaging, but on many occasions we segment our audiences based on our differences. And this is I think this is highly problematic for our industry, because it's led to this kind of stuff, right? These categories that we, as PRs, we still use, and these are media buying
planning tools, absolutely. They get us into very hot water.
Yeah, I mean, metropolitan, you know, what does that mean? Or professionals, we're going to target professionals, as if now all professionals read or consume the same media sources. We're going to target graduates. but there's no when we talk about graduates, there's no nuance in between, you know, what course, where they are, you know, their own personal experiences. We're actually saying that all graduates think the same, or we can easily target them all. And that may or may not be true, but the less we understand another group, and right at the start of my career, going back 20 years, I was asked as a junior exec, do a research on the brown pound, Rax. Yeah, this is an interesting, and I've heard this being talked through the lens of the pink pound, or, you know, the migrant dollar. And it's incredibly offensive. And back then, I probably didn't even register how offensive it was. But when we use terms like the Asian community, or BAME, or whatever, it's assuming that actually everyone in the Asian community is a homogenous voice. Are we talking about the Uber driver that takes you home, you know, after a night out? Are we talking about the Kashmiri heart surgeon, you know, is top of his game globally? Are we talking about my late father, who was a postman? You know, it's very, very, but I don't take offense to it, actually, because I think it comes from a place of, well, it comes from three places. So it could come from misunderstanding, it could come from ignorance, it could come from arrogance as well. So when we're asked to kind of look at new mums as a whole group, again, in the world of PR, we're tasked with actually getting our message across to our target audience, but we have to kind of really have an understanding of what makes them tick. So,
and it's the intersections, isn't it?
Totally. So just on, you know, the over 60s, I've specialised in digital PR, and nobody would ever entertain in any of the clients I work with, let's do a campaign on Facebook. But actually, in the UK, the fastest growing demographic on Facebook are over 60s. They're highly active on WhatsApp. But just for us, our assumption is, no, they're not digital. So I think, you know, this Socratic thing of just knowing what we might be wrong. So whether we're talking about women, men, we're talking about, you know, we're going to target office managers from a B2B perspective. I think this temptation to segment our audiences has always been there, and we need to almost break that. You know, we're going to talk about the LGBTQ plus community later on, but you know, every year Pride comes around and every brand wants to kind of jump on and stick a flag on their products. You know, if it's Listerine, it's a rainbow Listerine, or it's a you know, Marks and Spencer sandwich, and it can be highly problematic. And somebody in your team should actually be able to have the voice and say, this is a bit odd, this is not right, this is tonally, this is out. But for some reason that doesn't kind of carry through. So there's loads of ways. I'm going to skip through all these different, you know, hipsters. I should say that I was born in 1978, and so had I been born in 1980, I'd still be a millennial, which is crazy, right?
So are you a boomer then?
I don't know what I am. I'm an anomaly, as are we all. But you know, I think it's hard to when we try and do campaigns in the UK, and we have to understand quite a complex range of intersecting identities and factors. It's hard enough. And then when we start to suddenly take our business to a global stage, so let's say we're going to target the Chinese audience or Indian audience or American audience, we tend to really stereotype and generalize based on our own ignorance. And I think if it's coming from a misunderstanding, then make sure that absolutely you're sense checking that. If it's coming from a place of arrogance, then that's a leadership problem. And if it's coming from a place of ignorance, research it, Google it, you know. But more than that, ask people who are from that community, ask people for their experiences and their opinion. And I think the best way to do that is get as many different people within your organization as possible.
I think it is. It's so important, Rax, to do the research. You know, we talk about getting insight. We talk about, you know, understanding our audience needs. And, you know, I've worked on campaigns to tackle uninsured driving in the UK, and presenting that research and those findings back to senior leaders in the organization. People have always been surprised at how complex the issue is, how multifaceted it is, and that you can't say all young people drive without insurance and they're motivated because they want to willfully break the law. Actually, there are financial reasons why young people don't drive without insurance. It's actually perhaps an awareness and understanding and belief system. around insurance, motor insurance, for example. So I think, you know, get into the layers of what is causing your audience to behave in the way that they do, to interact with your product or services the way they do. And there's tons of ways and really reliable organizations that you can turn to. But ask the smart questions and recognize that potentially the things that you think are not possible, then definitely explore those. You know, I you know, map out your own belief system around why you think it's possible for this campaign to work, and then work backwards and ask yourself why it won't work and why audiences won't be receptive to it. So challenge your own bias and inherent beliefs, because you will be wrong. You will find someone who will challenge you and say that you are wrong. And if you research it well and you get good insight, you'll find some amazing other avenues in which to message or campaign and present your message. Yeah,
and I think there's something really, you know, I've said this to you before, and I think you fall in this category as well. I genuinely wake up in the morning feeling really, really in love with the work, the industry that we're in. Yeah. And part of that is actually learning and changing and evolving my stance and just being proven wrong. And I think what you've just said applies externally, you know, if we want to get our work right, but it also applies internally as well. Yeah. So under the banner of diversity, inclusion, or whatever it's called, there's loads of names and ways of calling it. People at the moment, and the last month I've spoken to over 30 agencies about their diversity inclusion framework, about, you know, what they need to do. And many are using it as a synonym for one topic or another. And I think 8 weeks ago, I was on an industry call and somebody said, Black Lives Matter is a great opportunity to talk about diversity inclusion, to which point my thinking was, no, Black Lives Matter is a really great opportunity and an urgent need to talk about Black Lives Mattering and about racism.
Absolutely.
And also, you know, when we talk about gender inequality, or when we talk about LGBTQ plus representation or disabilities, you know, all of these are issues that have very, very different needs. However, I think it's, maybe I'm wrong, but it'd be good to get your view on. I find it very, very sort of lazy thinking almost to say, you know, this equates to this. And actually, if we can get the fundamentals right on what's stopping us from really building a culture within our organizations where we're actively seeking out people of all experiences, you know, we'll never get it right. There'll always be another prompt for us to say, oh, okay, well, now we're getting this wrong, rather than kind of starting from the beginning and say, well, yeah, we've clearly got a race problem here. We've also got a problem around ageism. We've also got a problem. I'm not even saying there's a hierarchy or there's different weighting, and some might be more urgent than others. But I think to have that thinking done at senior management level is probably what's missing right now.
Completely. And I think, you know, some of the work that I've done in this space, Rax, is alongside members of a senior leadership team who are asking really important questions about their own belief system, their own experiences, and, you know, what some of the challenges might be for them and other members of the organization in undertaking, you know, a significant cultural change. But that cultural change has to start from within. Yeah. If you're asking, you know, if we're sort of standing as often PR professionals and experts do, we stand on the sidelines and we either cheer or we boo the brands and the services that are getting it, you know, doing it well, and those that aren't, without really deeply understanding what was the genesis of that piece of work and what is the leadership behind it. And so we start from a basis of criticizing, you know, brands and business leaders about their posture, their behavior. But I'm curious how many of us have actually spent time thinking about, well, if we expect that of other leaders and other brands and other businesses, have we asked ourselves those same tough questions? Have we applied that same criteria and lens to our own conduct, our own behavior, our own principles and values? And then can we honestly go to the leadership in our organization and appeal to them and ask them to do the work, so that when you do stand as a brand and you go externally, you are able to do it from the basis of real integrity and real honesty, because you've done the work. So these, leaps, and I'm guilty of it, a blackout on your social media for Black Lives Matter. I passionately believe that Black lives do matter. So and I have done some of the work, but certainly not all of the work, in understanding the perspectives and the issues that Black people experience. I know it from a South African perspective, but I'm learning more and more about what Black people have experienced in the UK and then in other territories across the globe. So I signal my support for that, because I know my principles and I can stand by them, and I know that they will remain unchanged. But brands also need to, we as comms professionals, I think, need to think very carefully about our expectations of ourselves before we go in and say we expect leaders to be perfect, brilliant, and have all the right answers.
Yeah.
Because if we don't know the answers ourselves, how can we guide and counsel those in leadership positions about their posture, their behavior, and the principles that need to perhaps be reconstructed and changed in an organization?
Well, I think to that point, I think there's something quite unifying, I guess, or it's very grounding to start with yourself and start with that question inside. I think more and more I'm seeing this D&I role, being opened up in a lot of organisations, and I'm not, some are really good and some probably not worth inventing a role for, but that is imposed on a workforce, and so I've seen anger, confusion, when suddenly now, there might be a move to recruit people from a certain part of the country or whatever, and people are saying, well, what about me? I'm in line, I worked hard to get here, without actually having the empathy to say, you know what, there is a rationale for this. I would happily, give up my seat on a speaker panel to a woman, a female peer, because if there were a systemic kind of bias towards male speakers, it would cost me and I'll feel the pinch. But it's something that I know that has to happen. And so I think understanding that we are all part of the problem. Okay, so in that last exercise where we've all felt really out of place in a room before, why is that? So suddenly when we start talking about issues of race or gender inequality or excluding disabled professionals, it makes sense. Like, oh, I know now how it feels to be that person or not to feel accommodated.
Yeah.
This is what we need to do. Okay, so I think it's interesting. We've got these talking points of cancel culture and Black Lives Matter. While it is obviously much more important than the other. However, the question is, why now? Why are we suddenly all talking about D&I now? Why the delay? Why is the penny suddenly dropped, if indeed it has?
I think this 2020 has been the worst and best year on so many different levels, and there was a huge spotlight on mental health awareness earlier this year. I think that there has been some really headline grabbing commentary by other public profile figures about the trans community, and I think that we have, and then of course George Floyd's very, very tragic murder has then brought and amplified the Black Lives Matter movement really into the forefront of, you know, our minds. So I do understand from one perspective how it is a springboard for us to be talking about D&I, and it's unfortunate that it's taken, you know, the death of, you know, a young man, a father, a brother, you know, for us to be talking about it. Caroline Flack's, you know, death, we talked about being kind. You know, somebody who was haunted by, you know, mental health issues, and you know, her interaction on social media and as a public profile figure. Her death was, you know, massively tragic, and there was an outpouring of be kind, you know, across social media platforms.
Carrying on, isn't it?
And yet, here we find ourselves, you know, with this sort of very destructive cancel culture kind of stuff filtering through, and I can't quite square the two, where we want to say, actually, we're here to have a conversation about equity, about equivalence, about, you know, our differences and where we come together as humans. And yet we want to still say, no, I'm going to cancel you out. You're dead to me. You're not allowed to talk on this issue. We're not going to buy your products or services anymore because you are making errors. And I think you said it earlier, Rax, you know, where there is, you know, where people are capitalizing on issues and not doing the work, I think that for me is an invitation to go in and disrupt in a very progressive, radical way, those organizations and those brands, because the reality is they will lose profit hand over fist in the future.
Yeah.
Because consumers are getting smarter, employees are getting smarter.
I mean, I agree everything you said. I just, sometimes I go flip from day to day. Some days I'm massively optimistic and very positive about progress. And then other days I hang my head in despair. And you know, I think I need to kind of reach a balance, really, because has progress been made? Absolutely. Has it been enough? No way is it enough. And whilst I welcome the spotlight right now on the agenda talking about inequalities, I think actually we need to frame this whole argument very much, not ignoring the inequalities, absolutely addressing them, but also showing what are we missing out on by not becoming more open to different experiences. And I'm guilty of this. I've recruited in jobs in the past, and you know, well, would that person be a good fit for the organisation? Whereas what I do now is actually, will they disrupt things a bit, and will they make us think differently because I want them? And you know, you talk about mental health, and it's something that you know affects me, affects many people in the industry, and it's only now that I can come out and talk about it. But that's an example of maybe an invisible disability, or not a disability. It's just a condition. So whether we talk about neurodiversity, or we talk about mental health, or we're talking about physical disabilities, you know, I as a diabetic, you know, will have certain needs or certain scenarios that need to be adapted to me at work. You know, I've been in several pitches where I've had hyperglycemic attacks, and my vision suddenly goes double, and I faint, and it's just very embarrassing. But actually, you know, it's something that probably isn't known about. And you know, there's hundreds of thousands of conditions like this. So whether it's hearing impairments, is our workplace, you know, fit for that? It's a shame that, you know, PR industry awards are often held at venues where there's no wheelchair access. It's just unforgivable. But it's because we're not asking ourselves those questions. And I think that question is, who are we excluding by doing this? And
why are we not comfortable about asking those questions and allowing others to talk about it?
Yeah.
Now, I was delighted to see, you know, Rachel Miller from All Things I See, you know, talk about her, you know, hearing, getting a new hearing aid, and the difficulties that she was having with putting a mask on, because a lot of the masks, you know, wrap around your ears, and she didn't have enough space for glasses, hearing aids and a mask. And
Yeah.
I just didn't appreciate that would be an issue.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she brought it to life so brilliantly. And it's such a fantastic consideration. You know, I've got masks that sort of go over my head, so I've sent her, you know, some of the information about that.
The Sikh community as well. So the Sikh community who wear turbans, you know, have had to adapt it, but it's not messaging that's coming through in this period. I mean, as well as, you know, all the big words that we saw on the word cloud at the start. I know the PRCA back in March, just before lockdown, launched its schools outreach program. I know Francis won't mind me saying this about him. He often tells the story himself, but Francis grew up in a council estate background and, you know, borderline poverty, and he got helped up and, you know, went to university, and he is where he is now. And I think that social mobility story, Francis' story is an anomaly. It's not what happens to most people, but well done for him. But our industry is very much, I think it's very perceived middle class. I think that at schools, at a level where we have school leavers at 16 going into other professions, my God, we need them. We need them just for TikTok. We need them to explain social media. We need them because our campaigns are being based on assumptions. Oh yeah, all kids are into da 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 da. Well, actually, let's get some. Sorry, I use the word kids, but let's get some younger people in, or get some people from other economic backgrounds, and not to maybe perpetuate this stereotype of our industry being party people, you know, celebrity lifestyle, which clearly it isn't.
No, but I also think that we you know, we have painted a perception of an industry that is glamorous, that, you know, there's something attractive about working for, you know, brands that are you know, high end, and in actual fact, sitting behind them are very unethical, inhumane practices. You know, we've seen with the clothing industry how many sweatshops are sitting behind these very, you know, glamorous prestige brands. And you know, I think there's a lot of questions that employees as well as consumers will be raising to say, am I buying from an organization that at its heart believes in, you know, equity and balance in society? And, you know, I've said it, you know, the bigger the gap between, you know, the very wealthy and the poorest of society, doesn't create inequality in terms of wealth. It creates greater social injustice on so many levels. And that is where we should have our spotlight. So I think we need to shift our lens away from, I want, you know, beautiful things to wear, beautiful places to live, beautiful places to holiday, you know, all of those very prestige-based brands, and ask ourselves, actually, would my life and other people's lives be so much better? And I think lockdown has sort of enabled us to have that conversation with ourselves, and certainly with, you know, partners and family members and employees about, are we creating a fairer society by buying more and consuming more and promoting more? Are we actually enriching our lives and enriching the lives of others by being kinder, by being fairer, by speaking up for those who perhaps don't have a voice? So I think from a you know, a brand perspective, when an organization starts to think about its, you know, its purpose may be ultimately to thrive and make a profit, but it doesn't have to do that at the expense of its principles. And I think this is where we as communications professionals can really help brands challenge their thinking. And then that should be a golden thread that runs through the organization. How they recruit, which suppliers they work with, what are their employment contracts and practices. You know, it'll bring into sharp focus those sorts of things like zero, you know, contract hours, the gig economy, people who are being exploited for what? So somebody can have a swimming pool at a
Yeah,
coastal
no, I agree. And
property. I mean, it's just lavish and
totally. I think that's systemic in our industry. And again, forgive me if that's a broad generalization, but with the sorts of agencies that I've worked with, you're seeing now during this period of lockdown or emerging out of it, the whole virtual working, remote working, how paradigms are being shifted. So your big swanky office in the middle of Covent Garden or Shoreditch suddenly doesn't seem as appealing to people. But I think looking at other systemic obstacles to diversity and inclusion in our industry, everything from how we do our award ceremonies. So I remember going to my first award ceremony, never ever having worn a tux before, right? Yeah. And just this assumption from me, my very working class background, it's a completely new world for me. There's a price point on your ticket. So all the smaller consultancies, probably it's a big expense. So that's why you always see the bigger agencies with the checkbooks out there then. Yeah. You see in ourselves, we all celebrate Christmas, right? We all have, our agencies will put a Christmas tree up or give away Easter eggs, which is lovely and I love it. But what do we do for Ramadan or Eid or Yom Kippur or Diwali? And I think it's all those cultural sensitivities as well to make people feel as if they belong. And that's a word I'd really like to explore with you now, Shavaun, is we talk about diversity and inclusion. And someone great once said, diversity is like being invited to a party, being on the invite list, and inclusion is being asked to dance, which is much better. But there is this belonging that I think is lacking, and we're excluding all of the images that we see on the screen right now. Yeah. Sometimes for people to park their beliefs at the door when they come in, or their experiences, and just to kind of forget them and then pick them up on their commute home.
Yeah, belonging is that, that moment where you feel you can walk into a room and you can say, this is who I am. I'm wearing my cultural dress. Yeah. And nobody bats an eyelid, turns their heads, or wants to, stroke my hair, for example, because I've braided it in a way that is aligned to sort of my cultural background, my race.
Yeah.
I want to be able to, belong without being a curiosity.
Yeah.
Without being, put in the spotlight and made to feel like I am something peculiar, a bit of a sort of circus thing that I can be paraded around. I had
a Pakistani colleague early on in my career. He used to take his prayer mat to the toilet and he used to bow down and pray in there when, that's his faith. And I said to him, well, actually, no one would mind. Just do it in the meeting room. And he just didn't feel that he could.
Yeah.
And that really pains me. And I'm thinking about that now, 15 years on. I'm like, oh my God, that's awful. Or a new mum who can't go and express her milk somewhere or breastfeed and all these little things that are in place that I think we all need to really, really think about. Say, well, and there's always going to be more stuff that we don't think about, but that can't happen in a rigid structure, right?
For sure. I've been thinking about, and I sort of raised the Skittles case study, with you, because it just frustrated me on so many levels, and I can't quite square how I feel about it. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Skittles, for probably about, I think this is about the third or fourth year running, and in different territories in the world, they've taken the approach to remove all the color from their the little Skittles product and make them all white, because as sort of the catchphrase says on the product there, only one rainbow matters during Pride. And I understand what it is that they're trying to achieve. I think it's been poorly executed though, because only one rainbow matters during Pride. So during Pride, only trans, LGBTQI people matter during Pride, but for the rest of the year they don't.
And where were they 20 years ago, these brands who would never have stood behind the gay community or the LGBTQ plus community
Exactly.
at all? It would have been a commercial suicide for them.
And then the bloody whiteness of it. I mean, for God's sakes, in this time, you know.
I mean, I have a dossier where I collect these sort of things, and I think if we go back to kind of where does this come from? Does it come from an ignorance, an arrogance, or just a willful misunderstanding? And it doesn't really matter which of those three or what proportion of those three. I think if we just need to take a step back and say, well, we need to challenge our own thinking. And I know we've only got a bit of time left, and there's loads more we could have talked about. But I just like to get, you know, there's stuff out there. So, you know, still, I find it really bizarre that in an industry that is almost, from what the results say, you know, fairly equal in terms of representation of men and women, and slightly more skewed towards women in our industry, although, you know, nowhere near the level they should be at the top of our industry. And I've worked with a lot of agencies who are run by really successful, really inspiring women. And we're still having examples where young girls, young females are being asked to wear heels to meetings, and it's just very bizarre.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on
I'm a mother to a young boy, and he's 15 years old, and I think the work starts at home. You know, where and within school classrooms. I want my son to grow up and to understand what it is to respect a woman, to value a woman. And I do it because I've got young nieces as well, and young nephews. And so I talk regularly to him about, you know, my workplace experiences and what he should expect when he joins the workplace, and how to deal with conversations where perhaps, you know, some of that locker room chat creeps into the workplace and marginalizes and sidelines women, and takes us back, you know, 50, 60 odd years. And I think it's regressive. I think also, you know, we've got to be prepared to have conversations with leadership figures about, you know, progressiveness. And I put it into two camps. Do you want to be comfortably progressive or radically progressive? And, you know, build monuments so that in the, and I don't mean those types of monuments that, you know, from the sort of colonial era that we all, you know, love to hate. I'm talking about those sort of monuments that are principles of the sorts of things that we will look back and we will see change in the behavior, the conduct, the language that we use, that we attribute to, you know, all the people in you know, our workspaces and our school environments, and, you know, our corridors of power in parliaments and Congress, etc. We should be aiming for, you know, the ability for women to speak up and say, I'm not wearing high heels, because I don't need to wear high heels, and you can't ask me and should not ask me to wear high heels. There is no reason for a woman to have to wear a short skirt and heels to make men feel happier in the workplace. I have two words and I won't say them here, but I would certainly be happy to say them to any man who asked me to wear high heels.
Yeah, absolutely, and so beautifully put. I think just trying.
I'd wear my Doc Martens just to really get the conversation going.
There's so much more that we could talk about, and this conversation will go on, you know, in various places.
I hope so. I hope we keep it going.
I think for me, that there is a temptation to talk in circles and to talk in silos, and I think it's important to emerge with some sort of just an approach. And I really like what you said at the end there about building monuments, because what I've been seeing of late is organisations desperate to build something, and they build sandcastles, and they build the most beautiful sandcastle, but within 24 hours it's going to be, you know, swept away and there's no trace.
Tide has washed it out.
Yeah, and I think there's a danger for us to do this. So I think that when you talk about your experiences, you know, as a female professional, taking that anger and that sense of really not belonging, and then to apply that to, well, how is that actually? How can I apply that to my professionals of colour, my peers of colour? How can I apply that to people from a very different background to me? Because now I understand what it means to be excluded. So I understand now, as you know, what the inoffensive language is and what the appropriate language is. Yeah. So as well as building on, this is actually not how you talk to black or ethnic minority colleagues, there is a baseline. Say, actually, you know, bullying someone on grounds of race is wrong. Bullying grounds of someone on grounds of disability or their gender is also wrong. So, you know, some building blocks for this monument. I think that would be, you know, something worthy of celebrating. There were in this presentations some other stuff of just around echo chambers and I think one of the best bits of advice I was ever given is just read stuff that makes you angry. And I do. I listen to stuff that I wouldn't normally listen to. I watch stuff on YouTube that was really not my cup of tea, but I need to understand the views of others. And I think that's something we can take away with us.
Definitely. I'd urge people to start to understand, you know, how to understand data, and where data isn't telling you a picture. It's missing stuff. It's presented in a way that is convenient and tells convenient truths. And you know, as professionals, I would urge you to spend time with data analytics and you know, data geeks to understand how data can be and statistics can be manipulated to your advantage, as well as, you know, to skew the perspective. I love this chart because, you know, yes, the world is made up of 50-50 male and female, but I think the poverty one down at you know, bottom near around about 7 o'clock is, you know, how much we believe that the world is made up of sort of very wealthy individuals, but in actual fact, there is, you know, perhaps we are inches away from poverty, and that should urge us and encourage us to you know, trim down that wedge and make it far more balanced.
So we're going to leave with a bit of a video, but before that, it was really good to get any kind of thoughts or initial questions or any points from everyone who's an attendee on this session. Is there anything kind of really that you'd like to challenge, or that you'd like to kind of get our views on, or to discuss further? Let us know in the comments in the chat.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear questions from individuals, or if you want to get in touch, you know, via LinkedIn, then do message and say I was on the session, you know, with Rax for the PRCA, and I'd be happy to get in touch and start a conversation going. So yeah. And
are there any, just in leaving out, are there any resources or exercises or activities? Obviously this is a very complex and nuanced area, but at a very simple level, I think, you know, knowing me, knowing you is about actually understanding our own place in the world and how we treat other people. Is there anything that you could guide people towards?
Yeah, and we've got some 2 great questions. So have a look at those questions, Rax, while I answer that point. You know, I've spent a bit of time, certainly during lockdown and prior to that, doing some of my own leadership coaching and thinking about what my values and my principles are. And I've got some great worksheets that I use to help map out actually what is my purpose. So if I want to challenge an organization about what their purpose is or what their values are, I decided that the best place for me to help others see what that looks like is to create my own map of, well, what is my purpose? What is my mission? And what are my values? And when you start to ask yourself those questions, you start to get under the hood of what are your principles in life and therefore how can you ask people tough questions about what theirs are, and then you can work out what you expect from them. So I'd be happy to share what those worksheets look like. And I've also got one, around leadership. And specifically, this is a work thing that you can do with your teams or your senior leadership teams that you're a part of. And it does two things. It does three things, actually. It starts a conversation centered around vulnerability and trust. And so it brings people into a space where they can share their deepest, moment of vulnerability. They can also share their best moments where they felt like they've been in their sort of flow around leadership. And anyone can be a leader. You don't need to hold a title to be a leader. And then the worksheet looks at what are your motivations in life. And as a team, if you start to look at what your motivations are, where you lead well, and where you're most vulnerable, you're opening up real honesty and a moment of bonding as a team. And you can start to understand, with diversity and inclusion very much in mind, are you missing something in your team? Have you missed something about a team member or a colleague that you never really understood before? Yeah. And I think that can help create ripples within an organization as well. I often work with my comms team to create the change that we wanted to see in the organization and model it. Yeah. And I think comms teams are very progressive in that sense and can be a place where others can look to and say, we want to be just like them. So absolutely. Model that kind of spirit. Brilliant. And I'm happy to share those worksheets with others offline as well.
I urge you all to take Shavaun up on her offer. Just a few points just to pull out from the chat. Jackie's shared a really good insight from NCVO, the charity, and how they've kind of taken a really good look at the systemic kind of discrimination in organisations. So I'm going to go away and have a look at that. Thanks so much, Jackie. Emmy, I really hope that I'm saying your name right, Emmy. Makes a really, really important point, and absolutely deserves repeating. She said she'd like to highlight the difference between call-out culture and cancel culture and the need for both.
Perfect, Emmy, absolutely.
And you know what, I wish we could do a new webinar on that, because I think it's a fascinating area and one that
maybe we should, Rax.
And then Ross McLean, thank you so much. He's asking, kind of when it comes to mosaic data, where can we go to kind of really break away from these stereotypes? And my take on that, Ross, is we just need to stop relying on the ad world to prove our understanding of our audiences. I think a really good starting place is just identify groups that could maybe inform some of the, or just a challenge or prove or validate or negate your assumption. It's a really good starting point. And I'm not saying that, I wouldn't be the person who is the authority on Asian people, right? But I could give you some insights, and I think you just need to cast that web out there. I think there is definitely a need for us to do this. There is some great data, in the back end of Facebook or whatever that you can get to show some intersectionality. But I think we absolutely need to move away from this position of just relying on this bulk segmentation, and just be more Socratic, follow Socrates, just be aware that what we know is probably wrong. And that's a great starting point, because we can only build up from there, right?
Ross, there is, just to answer Ross's question as well, there is a new group called Voices for All, and that's voices and then the digit 4 and then all afterwards, and it's voicesforall.co.uk. Take a look at that, because they're committed to improving diversity and inclusion within research. And so that might enable us to move away from these homogenous categories that make us very bland and vanilla.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you to everyone who has been on here. This will be up on YouTube without doubt. Thank you so much, Shavaun. If people want to get in touch, what's the best email, Shavaun?
So it's seen-and-heard.com. That's my email address, Shavaun, SHAVAUN, @seen-and-heard.com. And you can find me, I'm sure, on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks very much for Rax for the opportunity, and PRCA for hosting this. I've loved being a part of it and preparing for it. And thank you for taking the time to listen and endure the heat.
All right, I'm just going to play out with a video that Shavaun, I'm going to let you all kind of say your goodbyes, but feel free to hang on to the end of the video. It's a really, really good one. It's a bit of spoken words. Bye.